We just talked about positive and negative feedback in class and what equilibria was. So some of these assessment statements are things that we've already talked about. The other assessment statements will be included in this section of notes. So pause for just a second to get an idea of what it is we're looking at. All right, so equilibria is when a system returns to its original state following a disturbance. So if we look at that in terms of the types of feedback, negative feedback is what helps a system return to equilibria. Most of the time, you're not going to see sudden changes in a system. You're going to stay near equilibrium, but that doesn't mean that all systems aren't changes. You're always going to see change. So when a system is in equilibrium, your inputs are going to be equal to outputs. For example, if you look at this diagram, if the earth temperature remains constant, your energy input is going to equal to your energy output. But what happens is we are reducing the output of energy. As we increase the level of greenhouse gases, we're trapping more heat. UV radiation can enter Earth's atmosphere, go right through the greenhouse gases, is absorbed by Earth's surface, but they're re-radiated as infrared, and infrared is what the greenhouse gases trap. So as we add carbon dioxide, methane, other greenhouse gases, we are trapping some of that heat. And so what's happening is we're moving away from that equilibria and our temperature is rising. Whenever we have a fluctuation around a certain point, when we looked at our example in class when we drew the graph of the thermostat, we saw a fluctuation around a certain point. So whatever temperature your thermostat is set at, it's going to rise slightly above and slightly below, which is what triggers your heat or air condition to come on. So what happens over a long period of time, you see a balance. And most open systems in nature are going to follow steady state equilibrium. Here's another example of the snowshoe hare and the lynx in Canada. If you look at the graph, the blue represents the snowshoe hare numbers and the red represents the lynx. The lynx obviously is going to be the predator, the snowshoe hare the prey. When the snowshoe hare numbers rise, like if you look right here in the graph, then you see that the lynx numbers will rise as well because they have a food source. Well, when the number of snowshoe hare decreases, then in turn you're going to see a decrease of the lynx. But over a long period of time, we would see what we call steady state equilibria, because you can find an average number of snowshoe hare, an average number of lynx. All right, we talked about a thermostat as an example. Well, your body also acts as a thermostat. When your body gets cold, you shiver. The motion produces energy and heat to keep you warm. And the opposite, if your body gets hot, you sweat, which causes evaporation, removes heat from your skin, and causes your body temperature to fall. Now, sometimes we see what is called static equilibrium. We don't see that fluctuation. We see a constant equilibrium over time. One example would be the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. Now, today we have a set amount of oxygen. It has changed over the history of Earth. 4 billion years ago, we had very little oxygen. Then we had cyanobacteria, which were our first photosynthesizing life that released oxygen. Over time, our oxygen levels rose. We started seeing amphibians, reptiles, and then mammals. And then over the last 2 billion years, we've reached a static equilibrium of oxygen. We now have 21% of Earth's atmosphere is oxygen. So looking at the difference between static equilibrium, you can see that static equilibrium is constant, whereas the steady state equilibrium fluctuates about a given point. All right, other components of systems are transfers and transformations. We talked about how both matter and energy can flow through a system depending on the type of system. Most systems are open, which means they are going to transfer both matter and energy. So one example of how matter is transferred would be when a carnivore eats another animal. That matter is transferred from one to another. So also this can happen in non-living things when water is carried by a stream from one location to another. So the key thing about transfer is you are changing its location. Another example would be the movement of energy, ocean currents transferring heat, which in turn affects our global wind patterns and climate. Now, a transformation involves a change in the form or the state. So it can be a change in location, but also you're actually changing the form of the matter or energy. So when we convert glucose to starch, that you're changing it into a new form. And when light is converted to heat, we know from the laws of thermodynamics that heat can't be destroyed, but it is changed from one form to another and is usually degraded to heat. We can also go from matter to energy or energy to matter. We know from burning fossil fuels we can produce energy from matter. And in photosynthesis we take solar energy and we convert that into glucose. Both transfers and transformations require energy. Which do you think requires less? If you said transfers, you are correct. Transfers require less energy because you're not changing the state or the form of the matter or energy. So they're going to be a little bit more efficient. All right, let's look at dead matter. Try to decide if it is a transfer or transformation. So if you have dead organic matter entering a lake, that would be a transfer. If you have dead organic matter decomposing, that would be a transformation because that is a chemical change. Okay, let's look at water, evaporation and runoff. Which one is transfer and which one is transformation? Evaporation is a change of state, and we said in the definition of transformation if it changes state, so evaporation would be an example of that. A transfer is a change of location, so runoff, it's still remaining liquid water, but it's moving from one place to another, so runoff would be a transfer. Both matter and energy flows through system. We've already looked at matter as both input and output, and energy as both input and output. But matter and energy can also be stored within system. We refer to that as stock. Energy is usually going to flow one way. It can't be cycled back into a system. So here we see solar energy, which is absorbed by the producers, which produce chemical energy through photosynthesis, and is passed along the food chain. Now, heat is lost at each stage of the food chain from respiration and metabolic processes. And what happens during respiration is those carbon-carbon bonds that are formed in the glucose break apart. When they break apart, energy is released, and that's what is lost as heat in each step of the food chain. Now, matter can be input and output, but also flows through the cycle, or through the system, and becomes a cycle. We are going to talk about biogeochemical cycles. We'll look at nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur. Minerals are usually removed from the soil by plants. They're absorbed by the roots. And then as the plants decompose, or as the animals that eat the plants decompose, that's added back to the soil. Minerals also can become trapped in rocks. When sedimentary rocks form, those sediments of the soil that contain organic material become compacted together, so they're only released through erosion. Models are one way to show us more complicated systems, especially if we're going to try to determine what impact an input into a system will have. A lot of times it's hard to actually go out and study the system in action. So what we'll do is create a model so we can look at how inputs affect those individual parts. That way we can control the conditions, so we can just test one variable. We can make predictions and decide what it is that we're going to experiment, and then we can use those predictions to predict what would actually happen in nature. Here's an example of a quantitative model. Several ways this is quantitative. If you look at the thickness of the arrows, what that is showing us is how carbon flows from one compartment to another in our planet. So the thicker the arrow, the more carbon. Also, if you look next to the arrows are numbers that tell us the amount of carbon. In the boxes show us the stores where energy or matter is stored, and then the arrows would be your transfers and transformations. Here's a very simplified model of how the ecosystem works. So you have your inputs, your outputs, and your feedback loop. In order to be in steady state, then your inputs are going to have to equal your outputs. If you change that, then that's going to become positive feedback, might become exponential growth. So ideally we want our ecosystem and all the systems that make up the ecosystems to be in steady state. So models are helpful because they are simplifications of real systems and they help us make predictions. They are hypotheses. Because they are just a model, they give us just a prediction of what will happen. And one way models are helpful is that it simplifies and takes out some of the unnecessary elements when we are analyzing a system. It can make things easier to understand and process that are complex in the real world. The weaknesses, because it is a model, it's not going to be a perfect representation, and usually there are oversimplifications. In developing models, you also have human bias. So when we are creating these models of systems, things that are more important to us are going to play a bigger role in the model that we're creating. We're going to do some practice in class creating models, so make sure you understand the terminology, difference between transfers and transformations, the different types of equilibria.